Hi guys. As we lead up to the exams, I thought I'd go through how we go about writing an introduction. So for the next couple of lessons, you're going to be writing an essay on Wilfred Owen. So I want to talk to you about the expectations behind that essay, particularly the opening. So the first thing to always do, particularly in an exam, is to make sure you read and deconstruct your question first. So in an exam, you get about 40 minutes to write your essay. Make sure the first 4, 5 even minutes are putting your response together in a plan. The idea behind that is once you're writing, you can actually have a free flow to continue on with. You don't have to stop and try and think, what am I talking about next? So in order to do that, when you read the question, identify what is the verb. The verb's things like discussion, evaluation. It's essentially saying, what is this essay asking you to do? Often students write great essays, but they don't actually do what the question asks. Then the second thing is understanding what the actual question is asking. So what's the content that you need to provide to answer that question? So from there, plan your key response. What is your one clear answer to that question? Then from that clear answer, break it down into thesis points. Really, you're looking at 3 or 4 thesis points for every essay, and each thesis point becomes your body paragraph. So when you actually do begin your writing, your introduction has 3 things. The first thing you need to do is answer the question. This is where you state whether you agree or disagree, or if it's one of those questions that actually is more of a statement, doesn't have a question to it, and you have to reword it in a way that responds to that question. So don't just rewrite the question, reword it in a way that gives your response to the question. I'll talk about it a bit later on. The first part's also where you introduce your key text. And the second thing is you need to define your key terms. What are the main terms in that question that you will be talking about all the way through it? The reason you need to define your key terms is your definition is what shapes your essay. So even if you give a wrong definition for a term, the rest of the essay, if it suits that definition, then that's fine. Then you put in your thesis statements. You break down the 3 or 4 things that you're going to talk about. Now, in terms of a markup, really, I should be able to mark your essay on your introduction, because this is basically a summary of what you're going to talk about. If a key idea appears in your essay that's not in your introduction, it shouldn't be marked because it needs to be in there. So let's have a look at an example. So if there's a question, what does Dulce et decorum est suggest about young men went to war? Sorry, what does it suggest about why young men went to war? So in terms of verbs, there is no key verb from the HS syllabus here. But what you've got to do is try and interpret it. So the what does essentially means discuss it. Discuss the concepts within this poem and discuss what it's saying about why young men went to war. So our key terms here is why did they go? We need to understand that first in order to understand the poem itself. So in terms of planning, I came up with the idea that it was Wilfred Owen suggesting that they were manipulated. That's why they went. They were tricked into going. And they were tricked into going due to Horace's poem, which is where Dulce et decorum est comes from. And they were tricked there essentially to go and find out the horribleness of it. So this poem is eventually Owen being angry about why his generation was told a lie and went off and were killed for it. So here's my introduction. Dulce et decorum est is a Wilfred Owen's response to the information fed to him as a child, which ultimately manipulated him into experiencing the horrors of war. So essentially I'm saying there in my question is, I've answered it, they went to war because they were manipulated. That manipulation led him to seeing the horrors of war. So notice I went that extra step to talk about the horrors because the poem itself is about a young man being gassed and being killed. So now I have to define this concept of why the young men went. A generation of English schoolboys were exposed to much propaganda focusing on the heroic nature of war, which led to students enlisting to go to World War I. So the big argument is that Wilfred Owen enlisted to go to World War I. He chose to go there. But in reality, he was tricked into that choosing. All the way through his schooling, he was fed lots of poetry and amazing stories that talked about the benefits of war. So that's my definition. So now I break down my thesis points. I've got 3 key thesis points here, but I haven't written them in 3 sentences. So Owen is responding to the famous ode of Horace that states that it is honourable and noble to die in war. So that's my first thesis statement. Owen is actually talking about Horace. Notice as well I'm calling him Owen now. At the beginning I called him Wilfred Owen. When you first talk about an author, you can use their full name. But after that, always use their last name, simply because of the fact that you don't know who they are. So you have to refer to them in a respectful way. So my next two dot points are intermingled. The poem juxtaposes this understanding with the realistic nature of war and highlights the true suffering shown through the horrific death by gas to enforce that the lie was told to Owen's generation. So my first point is the poem justifies the understanding within the realities of war. Essentially, this is going to be a paragraph that talks about the soldiers being bent doubled, walking like old hags, they're all shot, etc. Essentially saying that nothing in war is heroic. And then it talks about the suffering, the use of the actual man dying, the way he dies. Owen watches him die in first person. We hear the gas bubbling out of his lungs when he's carried back. So the third dot point is talking about how this man's death really reinforces to Owen's generation that they were lied to. There's nothing heroic in the way the man died. Not only that, he didn't achieve anything out of it. Okay, so what I do now, I jump into my first body paragraph, which is written in pill form, and I go on and talk about the fact that Owen is responding to the famous ode. Now, within there's not going to be that many quotes attached to it, so you want to look at what type of quotes and techniques are going to show that he himself is reflecting an ode. So look at the structure of the poem and look at the language he's using. So he's trying to mimic the way Horace wrote his. All right, good luck, guys.